Hello, everyone, and good evening, and welcome to our forum on the constitutional amendments. My name is Kenny Francis, and I'm going to actually change our. Here we go, so I can see us better. My name is Kenny Francis. I am the Vice President of Indivisible New Orleans. Thank you guys, everyone who is tuning in for this conversation about the amendments that will be on our ballots come this November in Louisiana. As many of you have experienced, like myself, the amendments can be very confusing. And selfishly, I need this myself. I was just talking to Representatives Landry and Matt Willard before that. I need this myself to learn what the amendments mean so I can also be an informed voter in November. So I'm really excited and thankful to the both of them for doing this. You might notice that we don't just see Representative Mandie Landry on there. Matt Willard has joined us, also a representative from New Orleans. He's going to be taking some of the amendments in a second. Before we get started, just a little bit of housekeeping. I want to remind everyone that we have at Indivisible New Orleans, we have a bunch of forums coming up. This week, we have four forums just this week. We have one tomorrow night with Sarah Emojula from the Vera Justice Center. She's going to be talking to us about what a district attorney does. We're voting for a district attorney in November, in case you didn't know. And what she's going to be going over is all of the legal powers and responsibilities of a district attorney and what you should expect from them. So you can, again, make an informed vote in November. On Thursday, we are participating in a Youth Justice Coalition forum for the DA's race here in New Orleans, which is going to be talking about youth juvenile justice issues related to the district attorney. On Sunday, on Sunday, October 4th, we're having District 1 of the Orleans Parish School Board. We're having a forum for the candidates for that race. And then on Monday, October 5th, we're having the District 2 candidates forums. And then later in October, we have a bunch more school board forums. But tonight, we're talking about the amendments. And thank you, Mandie and Matt, for joining us. You might recognize Representative Landry as Fox News' favorite Louisiana legislator now. Mandie, I just want to say for the record, for anyone watching this, that as someone who got to vote for you and lives in your district, I'm extremely proud to have you as my representative, and I think you do an amazing job. And I think you becoming the ire of anger from Fox News is as good of a underline of how good of a job you're doing as you can possibly get in this climate.
The hayride found me in May, which is the local version of Fox News. And so I feel like it was just a matter of time. So thanks. I represent my district. I tell everyone that here. I'm like, I literally represent my district. We all are friends. They agree with most things I do. So I appreciate that.
I know. And you support such crazy things as people being able to vote by mail instead of dying, trying to vote in person. Things like a woman choosing to do with her body what she wants, fair wages, paid leave. Those are crazy things, Mandie. How dare you?
Too far-fetched.
I mean, Matt does it too. There's two of us.
I know, Matt. You tried to get paid sick leave for people. How dare you?
I'm a rebel,
Well, if people don't tell you guys enough, like, we really appreciate what you do. And given folks, I mean, let's be frank about what our legislature often looks like. You guys don't have an easy job, often going up against a ton of opposition for what feels like basic resources and basic rights. So thank y'all for serving our community and for fighting for us. Okay, so before we get started, if you have a question while we're going over these amendments, you can submit your questions at Slido, that's slido.com. And the event code's amendments. You can see it if you're watching here in the banner. So if you submit your questions there, they will pop up on my screen and I'll be able to ask them for the two representatives. So with that.
Room or anything, is there?
Huh?
It's not like a chat room or anything like that, is there?
No, there is not a chat room.
Just wondering.
So Fox News can't find you there.
I'm just wondering, they're watching and recording and dubbing over what I'm saying right now.
I'm sure there will be something they can pull out and say, "Oh, see, we were right about her." So with that, I'm going to share a tab I have open that has the amendments, because I think what will be helpful for folks is to be able to actually see what we're talking about. So I'm going to add that in a second. All right. So let's start with the first one. The first constitutional amendment is the title is relating to declaring that there is no right to and no funding of abortion in the Louisiana Constitution. And it says, do you support an amendment declaring that to protect human life, a right to abortion and the funding of abortion shall not be found in the Louisiana Constitution? What does that mean in English?
So this amendment is technically superfluous right now, but what it does is it would go into place. It would come about. That's not the word I'm looking for. If this passes, it's meaningless unless Roe is overturned. And so where this came from is there were some states, I think Kentucky might have been one, and another random state that held that their state constitution contained a right to abortion and reproductive care. And so our state wants to make sure they close every door, window, hatch, everything they possibly can if Roe is ever overturned. And so this would sort of cross all the T's and dot the I's. Louisiana already has a trigger law. There's maybe 10 states or a little more that have a law on the books passed under Kathleen Blanco that says if Roe is overturned, abortion is immediately a crime in the state. This would only sort of come about if we had a state court that tried, or the state Supreme Court eventually, that tried to override that law. So this would just make abortion completely criminal in all circumstances, period. And unfortunately, with the newest Supreme Court nominee, I mean, that's something that I never thought was possible, but it might be possible.
And okay, so this basically doubles down on an existing law we already have, putting it in the Constitution.
Yeah, I mean, we have more abortion-related laws than any state. We have almost 100. We're down to 3 clinics. We used to have 12. Yeah, it's really bad, and they come up all the time, and they come up in sneaky little ways. But you know, luckily we had a win, I guess you could say, at the Supreme Court. So it kind of gave us like a little bit of time with what's going on, but there's still so many cases out there. We have a really bad Fifth Circuit. We have more federal judges coming, down the pipe. And if Trump's reelected, I mean, the entire federal judiciary is going to be pretty messy. So this is bad, but we already have very bad laws on the books. There is a campaign on this amendment that you can find. I think the website is LA for Freedoms, but it's on all the social media, and it's trying to just raise some awareness. And the main talking point, because people watching this are obviously not going to like this, but if they can get involved, the main talking point is that this amendment does not have any exception for rape or incest or the life of the mother, and that makes it pretty inhumane and extreme. And they tried to add that amendment to this amendment so that it would be more acceptable to normal people, and they just wouldn't do it. So yeah, no exceptions for rape, incest, or life of the mother.
So this one seems pretty cut and dry. If you in any way believe a woman has a right to control her body or be safe, you should vote against this one.
Yes.
All right. Let's go to anything to add on that one, Matt. Did I miss it? You want to add anything?
That's Mandie's wheelhouse. She covered it excellent.
But we have about 10 openly pro-choice reps, and he's one of a few of them.
I think we have more than 10.
No. Me, Royce, Matt, Amy, Jason. I don't know where Candace is. Sam, Cedric, Candace, Denise. Oh, Ted. Maybe we got 11 or 12.
All right, so let's move on to the second one. So the second one, it says it amends determination of fair market value of oil or gas well. Do you support an amendment to permit the presence or production of oil or gas to be included in the methodology used to determine the fair market of oil or, I need to scroll down to show the rest of it, or gas well for the purpose of property assessment? So I'm going to read that again. Do you support an amendment to permit the presence or production of oil or gas to be included in the methodology used to determine the fair market value of an oil or gas well for the purpose of property assessment? So again, I would love for you to explain what that means in English.
Thanks, Kenny. So this issue has been, from my understanding, a big struggle between the oil and gas companies in Louisiana and the parish assessors throughout the state. And I'll try to give you some background info on why it's been a struggle. Currently, these oil and gas wells are taxed for ad valorem purposes at the same level.
What does that mean?
So I'll give you a real example here. If you have one well that produces 100 barrels a day, and then you have another well identical that produces 1,000 barrels a day, obviously the one producing 1,000 barrels generates more revenue. But for an ad valorem tax purpose, they're taxed exactly the same. Okay, so assessors have issue with that because they want to get more money from that well that's producing 1,000 barrels a day. The oil and gas companies have issue with it because they don't believe that they should be paying the same tax for that well that's producing 1,000 barrels a day if they have a well that doesn't produce any. Right now, if they have a well that doesn't produce any oil or gas, they can still be taxed. So this constitutional amendment kind of brought both parties together, which doesn't happen too often. I'm on the Ways and Means Committee, so they're usually at odds because usually oil and gas wants to do things that's going to take away from parish revenue, right? So this one brings them together. And it gives the assessors more discretion to factor in how much revenue those wells are producing.
So to give like a concrete example of that, so go back to like your example that you tried to give. So if there's a well that produces 100 barrels a day, and I'm an oil and gas company, and that's my well, and you have a separate oil and gas company that has another well that produces 1,000 a day. Right now, we would pay the same taxes.
We could.
And this would allow.
It's not guaranteed, but we could, yes, under what we have right now.
And so this would allow an assessor to say, well, yours is making more money, so you owe us more money in taxes, right? Because you have higher revenue. It also would allow an assessor to say that Mandie's oil well, which is not doing well and is producing no oil at all, she doesn't have to pay taxes because she didn't make any profits.
Right. And so basically this gives the assessor discretion to factor into the value of the land on how profitable a well could be, right? So you could have a well that could produce 1,000 barrels a day, but if the price of oil is down, maybe you're only producing 100, right? Okay. But if the price of oil is up, you're producing as much as you can. So this gives the assessors throughout the state discretion in how they set the ad valorem taxes for that. And the Louisiana Tax Commission is going to have to promulgate rules for this if this constitutional amendment passes. So we'll have another road to go through at that point. But all in all, I'm not going to tell you how to vote on this one, but I'll probably support this one.
So, and I guess let me ask a different one for this one. What would happen if it doesn't pass? Like, what does it fall back to? What is the current status quo?
So it's like a cost-based approach that factors in, I believe, the cost to get the well online to start producing oil. But I think the issue is that it doesn't account for depreciation. So over the duration of the well. Okay.
And then the last question I have on this one is, so if it basically gives each assessors the leeway to decide based upon the circumstance, then that would mean that each parish assessor, which we vote for, like we vote for other sort of local positions, they're going to be charged with figuring out how to tax this in their parishes that do have oil wells.
Yeah, and they're going to have to work with the Assessors Association is going to have to work with the tax commission on the process of how they do that.
Gotcha. I'm going to ask a question that came in here. Someone said, what if you don't trust your assessor? Is there any relief in those circumstances?
Well, in New Orleans, to my knowledge, I don't think we have any of these wells, but yeah, I mean, I guess that's something to consider, kid.
Yeah. So, I mean, hypothetically speaking, if you had an assessor whose policies you weren't in agreement with, this would hypothetically give them more power.
I think we already have.
Yeah.
Maybe power is not the word, but like more discretion.
Yeah, more discretion. They're still going to have to follow the methodology laid out by the tax commission. But yeah, it's going to give them more discretion than they have right now. But okay. I do want to stress it is big that the assessors and the oil and gas companies came together on this. because like I said, usually oil and gas is trying to make moves that take away from the local government's revenue, maybe reduce.
Yeah, I'm surprised they're agreeing to this at all.
Yeah,
I'm surprised this amendment doesn't say you can't tax us.
Yeah, right. And to my knowledge, this wasn't the first time that they've tried to do this. I'm still going to read. I'm going to read into it more and try to find out more information on it. But from everything I've read so far, it's not. It doesn't appear to be a bad amendment.
Okay, I got one more question that came in on this one before we go to the next one. Is there a reasonable assumption that commercial/residential property assessors can fairly assess oil and gas wells? That might be very in the weeds.
No, I wouldn't say you're going into the weeds. I will say that assessors in those parishes that have those wells have experience doing it.
Cool. Thank you. All right, let's go. Let's move on to the next one. So it sounds like on that one, it seems like a reasonable one from what you said, Matt. And I guess this is a time to plug, pay attention to your local races. If you don't like your assessor, make sure you vote for a different one.
Yeah. And Kenny, I just, in my experience, and I do this too, if I'm not convinced or if I don't know too much about the amendment, I vote it down. I'm just saying that this one, it doesn't appear to be bad. And the compromise where both parties came together, I'm actually going to look into this one a little bit more and see if there's any reason for me to go against it.
Gotcha. Man, did you have something to add there?
Yeah, something I meant to say at the beginning, just generally, first of all, it's good that so many people are interested in their ballot in these amendments. I mean, I don't think I've ever looked at the amendments before I walked in. But there's a lot of questions about, like, why are we voting on all these amendments? This is weird. Isn't this something that, legislature or whatever should do? And the answer for a lot of it is, yes, it's things we should do that can't get passed. So it gets sent to the voters to decide, which is fair. But we also have a really long, complicated constitution that has a lot of tax and financial requirements. And there's a lot of weird things in our constitution that generations of legislators ahead of us got in this way because it's really hard to pull it out once it's in. And I'm going to give you a 20,000 foot view of the budget, which probably a lot of your viewers know what I'm talking about. The state budget of Louisiana is heavy on dedicated funds. That means no matter how much of it you use or how much we need in other places, you can't touch it because it's in the Constitution. So that's why every time we don't have money, it's a fight between healthcare and education and the handful of items that are undedicated, because that's the only place we can cut. And that's because we have a constitution that is long and lengthy and hard to change. The flip side of that is right now, everyone pushing for a constitutional convention is the absolute worst people you want to rewrite the Constitution. Like, in theory, philosophically, we need to do this, and there is no way I would ever support it right now. We don't have anywhere near the amount of people who would thoughtfully, and we get screwed, who would thoughtfully redo it. So it is something that has to be done when we hopefully one day have a more balanced state government. But
how about we get fair districts first, and then we can talk about a constitution.
Redistricting next year, we can talk about that constantly. I'm sure you'll have Royce on 25 times. But yeah, that's where we need to go next. So anyway, that's why you're voting on taxing of oil wells, this ballot. The next one is good, and I gave it to Matt too.
Thank you for explaining that. All right. So here's the next one. The next one, number 3, it amends the use of the Budget Stabilization Fund. It says, do you support an amendment to allow for the use of the Budget Stabilization Fund, known as the Rainy Day Fund, for state costs associated with a disaster declared by the federal government?
Yeah, Kenny. So our colleague, fellow New Orleans delegation member Gary Carter actually brought this bill forward in light of the COVID pandemic. Right now, we can use some of the Rainy Day Fund to stabilize the budget. But there are certain requirements that have to be in place in order for us to do that. And so what Gary is trying to do is sort of revamp all of that and allow for us to use some of that rainy day fund to stabilize the budget if a federally declared emergency happens. funds. Okay. And so if COVID, moving forward, if something like COVID happens again, we're having, revenue issues because the sales and use tax from our parishes throughout the state have plummeted. It would allow us to sort of plug in the gap with some of that rainy day money. And then it would be replenished once we receive federal funding. Okay, so this constitutional amendment would allow us to use a third of the rainy day fund, which right now I think is around 300 million. So it would give us access to about $100 million from the rainy day fund to use during a federally emergency declaration, which I think is a good use for the rainy day fund. And then it would be replenished once we received, federal funding. So I'm supportive of this one.
I have a couple questions. So question one, how is the rainy day fund funded and non-disaster getting money from the Fed's time? Like, where does that money come from?
The rainy day fund?
Yeah.
We put some in every year, I believe, or we try to put money in it every year.
Okay. And basically, if there's like a surplus, that's what we do with money.
Yeah, when you're looking at a surplus, and I think we're required to put. I'm not 100% sure, but I think we're required to put some in the rainy day fund when we have a surplus.
And this amendment essentially, because I know as someone who follows these things as closely as I do, partially because of work. So like say COVID hits and we had this downgrade in our revenue forecast. There's all this concerns about the state being able to continue to do business with revenues. This basically would allow us to dip into the rainy day fund to spend money before, instead of having to wait until we get reimbursed by the feds, which is basically how that always works. The feds reimburse you
right
in whatever amount of time for what you spent. Like that's basically what's happened with the CARES Act dollars.
Right.
It's all reimbursements. And so this will allow us to legally front money by using a third of the rainy day fund to front money when we need it.
Right.
Does it and this is specifically a disaster declared by a federal government. So it would have to be like the Fed said that like we declare a disaster in Louisiana after a hurricane, or we declare a national disaster because of a pandemic. It can't be for some like made up reason.
No, this is federal. This is a federal declaration. So it would have to come from DC.
Gotcha. And so you said that you would vote for this one. Yes,
I'm supporting this one. Yeah.
Okay.
Just given what we were going through, like Mandie was just talking about, if the revenue forecast drops and we have to make cuts, those cuts are going to education. They're going to healthcare. So this would give us some leeway. It's a third of the rainy day fund. And just from my perspective, if you have a rainy day fund, I believe a federal disaster declaration is certainly cause to use some of that money.
Yeah.
And Kenny, on top of it, in order for us to do this, 2/3 of both chambers have to vote on it.
Okay, that was one of the questions. One of the questions was who decides this?
Yeah, two-thirds of both chambers would have to vote for this.
So in a let's play this out. So like hypothetically speaking, if this was already in effect when COVID hit and we had severe effects to our revenues, 2/3 of both the House and the Senate would have had the vote in favor of dipping into the rainy day fund to front money on behalf of the state, with the hopes that we would get that reimbursed by the federal government later on.
Correct. And we were fortunate this year. We didn't take up HB1 and pass HB1 until we had already received CARES Act money. So we were able to use some of that CARES Act money to plug in some of our budget holes. But that may not always be the case.
A couple more questions on this. One says, there are federal disasters in Louisiana pretty much every year. Would this make the rainy day fund a regular part of that response?
No, because you would have to get 2/3 of members from the House and the Senate to sign off on this. And so when you're
talking— Can you get 2/3 of the members of the House and the Senate to agree that the sky is blue?
Yes, exactly. You're talking about money.
Well, is there capital outlay on the table?
I mean, it is it's a hefty lift, right? Getting 2/3 consent from the Senate and the House is no easy task. So that won't happen under, minor circumstances.
And you also have to be in session to do that, which, as we know, I mean, the reason we're in Baton Rouge, although we have to be in session.
No, so this
I didn't even know that.
this amendment would allow the legislature to vote on this even between sessions.
Okay.
Yeah, so I guess technically we would be able to vote by mail on this.
Like we did on the emergency election.
I'm going to save some time at the end because, Mandie, I do actually, before we close out tonight, want you to give everyone an update on like where can we vote or not. Like I want you to talk about that at the end.
Okay.
The one more question on this one: would there be regulations on what kind of state costs could be covered by this?
It's not state costs. It's to fill in the budget.
Oh, I see. So it wouldn't be like we spent $50 million in testing and we're covering that. It's we have a budget gap of $50 million and we're covering that.
Right.
Got
so
it.
we would take, let's say we use 1/3 of what we have today. We would take $100 million and give it to higher ed. Right.
Gotcha.
Once we get federal money, that $100 million in the rainy day replaced. Yeah.
One last question on this one. Would it end up becoming a geopolitical struggle where certain regions of the state could withhold aid from other parts of the state? But the answer is no, because you're just filling a state budget. It's not like you're saying we're not going to give money to Monroe, who just had a hurricane, because we don't like them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, if you get into the details, that could happen. Yes. Hopefully during a crisis like this, where we would even be considering such a measure, people, would put the people of Louisiana first and put politics aside. But to answer that question, it could happen. Yeah.
Okay. So ultimately, where do you stand on this one? Should we vote for it?
Yeah. Well, I'm supportive of this one. Yes.
Gotcha. All right. Going to move on to the next one.
I'll start it. But.
So number 4 is it limits expenditure limit for state general fund. Do you support an amendment to limit the growth of the expenditure limit for the state general fund and dedicated funds to remove the calculation of its growth factor from the Constitution?
So do you see the grimace on both of our faces?
This one is doing too much, and I'm not going to vote for it. I remember when this came to the floor, we were all kind of confused about it.
I literally grabbed the author of the bill last night, stopped and talked to him for about 15 minutes on it, and I'm only this much more clear on what it does. I think the big picture is right now, like I said, there's a lot in our Constitution. There's a formula for how we determine how much we're going to spend each year. And it's generally what we've spent the past 3 years, a sort of, I think an average or something like that. And what this would do, it would remove that calculation. And what I think what people aren't going to like about it is it gives more discretion to the legislature to do it, but again, by a 2/3 vote. I kind of got some of his arguments. He's like, look, next year, post-COVID, the economy being what it is, he's like, we're not going to have as much money to spend as we had the last 3 years. Like, that's just not reality. Like, say, say I had $1 million last year and this year I have 200,000. Like, why am I making a budget of $1 million? Because I'm never going to have $1 million. So I get what he's saying. I'm sure our budget gives accountants fits, but this is still hard even for us to understand and trust that it's going to be done right.
It sounds like this puts an artificial ceiling on the budget, right, Kenny? And when that happens, you have to make cuts to departments and to services.
Gotcha.
I get his point that we're not going to spend, why make a budget with money that's not real? But I feel like this gives discretion to those, to people who want to destroy government. And they're like, well, we don't have the money to spend, or we're not going to spend that much money. And then everything's cut across the board. He did say there's no zeroed out requirement. Like I think some states have and we do to a certain extent, where you have to zero your budget. It does.
This feels like a constitutional amendment version of a bill that was filed last session that would have put a cap on state spending of like 90%, 5% of the forecast, or less than 200. This feels, is it the same person?
And Kenny, that's the feel I get from it too.
Is it the same author?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, it feels just like that. Like you said, it's an artificial ceiling on spending that doesn't make much sense. And also, like, if you can struggle to explain your argument for why we should do it, then we definitely shouldn't put it in the Constitution.
Right. And the author is a really bright guy. He's I think he's like an investment advisor. Like this is his world, budgets and accounting. And so it made sense when he was telling me, but I mean, we're educated voters sitting here, and I'm not sure I know what's going to happen if we vote for it. I guess is kind of my caution on it.
I don't want to put this in the Constitution,
Yeah, I feel like go figure out how to pass a bill like related to this rather than Moving on.
It would be harder because you got to go through appropriations and
then the governor,
All right, so number 5 says authorizes cooperative endeavor tax exemptions. Do you support an amendment to authorize local governments to enter into cooperative endeavor ad valorem tax exemption agreements with new or expanding manufacturing establishments for payments in lieu of taxes? Just listening to this sounds like a change to ITEP. Does that have to do with this?
Yes, and as a backstory, this slid through. Some of us might have accidentally voted for it. The backstory is they've been trying to do this or something like it for several years. And what happened, I met with Together New Orleans, and because of COVID, we didn't have the usual activists and advocates at the Capitol. And there were certain days. There was one day we voted on like 120 bills. I mean, that happened a lot. It was terrible. All kind of stuff flew through. This was one. Luckily, it's something we can vote down at the polls, though. So just because this is on your ballot doesn't mean it's going to be law. But this is ITEP. I think.
I know because I'm a nerd, and it's partly my job. But can you explain generally what this means?
Yeah. So, or should we call it pilot? Either way. You can start it, and then I'll.
So ITEP is an incentive program that Louisiana's had in place, I think, for about 80 years. And it's to incentivize companies to come here, and they get a waiver for property taxes for a certain period of time. Right now, I think it's 10 years. But it's always being attempted to change. I'm on Ways and Means Committee, so we deal with ITEP bills all the time. This one is kind of a standard, what's called a pilot, payment in lieu of taxes. And I have a couple issues with this bill, pilots just in general. Number one, they take away from the tax base a source of revenue for your local governments. So this bill, I'll try to give you another example because that's usually the easiest way to get a point across, right? So let's say a company is looking to set up a new manufacturing, actually better yet, they're trying to do enhancements to an existing manufacturing facility. The local government, if this constitutional amendment passes, the local government can say, okay, well, if you do this expansion, we'll waive your property taxes for X number of years if you give us $3 million up front so we can pay for this bridge, right? During that course, 5-10 years, whatever the taxes are waived, the city could actually generate 10 million in revenue. So this allows the local government to kind of get cash up front, which may be useful for a certain project. So local governments sometimes are in support of pilot agreements. But overall, they reduce the revenue for that local government. Another problem that I have with this is that these deals usually occur in communities that polluted. They're riddled with these facilities. You know, black people live there. They're lower income. You're not going to find these in upper middle class and wealthy neighborhoods. So that's another issue that I have with this bill, with this constitutional amendment. I won't be supporting this one.
I mean, I'm gonna say it a different and more blunt way than you, Matt. What typically happens is you have a company coming in wanting to build like a plant, like a chemical plant, and they say, we'll give you X amount of money upfront, city, which we're gonna drain some of your revenue over the next 5 to 10 years for this already impoverished community, and well, it's cheaper for the company. Because I think, and if folks who are watching this are unfamiliar with the work that Together Louisiana has done on this, you should go look it up. They produced a great body of work on this and a great study that shows that a lot of these ITEP agreements don't actually benefit the local communities. What ends up happening is the companies pay what, compared to the company's profits, is a small capital outlay up front. The local community ends up out of, like you said, Matt, revenue for X amount of time, and it's a bad deal. Like at the end of the day, it's often a bad deal for the local government, even though there might be some short-term financial influx for, like you said, a specific project or a specific budget period. And I know that another way that ITEP typically works is there's like usually a promise of like jobs. So it's like, well, if you like give us this break on taxes, we'll bring you jobs. And one of the things that Together Louisiana did a really good job with their analysis is showed that like in the 80 years this has been in effect, there hasn't been that many jobs, let alone sustainable jobs created. And so I think that for the most part, our local governments should just get the tax dollars they're owed so they can provide services for their people.
Another problem with it is that it puts, I guess, temptation on those local elected officials, right? You want to bring jobs to your community. You want to spur development and infrastructure upgrades. So it's, you know, they're dangling something at you, and it looks attractive, but over the long term, these agreements are pretty bad for our local communities.
And cynically, it doesn't incentivize long-term thinking from elected officials. Like as a voter, I want you as my elected officials to think about what's best for my community over time. Not that, oh, you built a bridge with this $5 million you got, and you get to talk about this bridge in your next election cycle. I want to know like what you did for me over the body of your elected time.
It's more, and it goes beyond that. You know, once the pilot is executed, you talk about the number of construction jobs that will be available for the upgrades. You know, you talk about the expansion and how many new people you can bring to the facility. But we all know that those numbers don't always hold true. And oftentimes they miss the mark.
And this amendment comes from, it's the Cameron LNG, which again, like Together worked on for a long time, but I didn't realize, I got some research on it. So what happens is they get these, like he said, these communities that are really hurting. And this community they were about to deal with layoffs of deputies in schools, and they like really were desperately in need of money. So they signed this agreement. It was the sheriff and the school board to take $400 million, which seems like a lot of money. But if the company had paid what they were supposed to, it would have been $1.5 billion.
Yeah.
So more money. And even the DA there said it was a terrible deal. It was deemed illegal and unconstitutional. So then for 3 years, Cameron came back to the legislature to try to get it passed. They couldn't get this legislature to pass it. And they finally got it through in a COVID year just to go on the ballot, where I think it will probably die a hopeful, painful death. But what's also interesting that I got from a little bird named Maggie, who's probably watching, is that it's most people, 99% of people and businesses won't be eligible for this. It's only a handful of manufacturers. It's only a handful of people who are making a ton of profit from our state. And as we know from Together, so many of those companies, when they don't get the deduction renewed, they leave. They literally leave as soon as they would have to pay taxes. So what do we get out of that?
Nothing.
Definitely dry up.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So we got one question on this one from the audience. Do pilots ensure that the money given upfront is used in the local community, the neighborhood where the property taxes would benefit?
Yeah, I mean, so it should it should be that way, and the local government would be at the table negotiating this deal. So I mean, I would hope the local government would put it where, but here's an example. Let's say we had one of these facilities in New Orleans, right? Going on the West Bank. And instead of the property taxes, we get $5 million from this company. And the mayor and the city council decided to use that $5 million for, a wetlands project in the Ninth Ward. Is that fair? Because that can happen. They could take that money for the community being impacted on the West Bank and spend it somewhere else.
Yeah.
I would hope
it becomes discretionary funds that the local. Okay.
It wouldn't have to be directly going into that community.
Unless the deal was written that way.
Right.
And so that would be up to us, the voters, the constituents, to be like, if you're going to agree to this, make sure it's actually used in my community.
Correct.
I have one more question on this. When it comes down to actually making these pilot deals, am I right in assuming that the people who can negotiate these would be all of the parish-wide taxing authorities? So it would be like in Orleans, it would be the sheriff, the school board, and the city council?
Yes.
Okay.
And they can be indefinite. So you could have someone come in and take advantage of your community at a time that it's really hurting, and then they never pay taxes. It's kind of a worst case scenario.
Gotcha. All right. We got 2 more to go. Number 6 says increasing income limit for homestead exemption special assessment level. Do you support an amendment to increase the maximum amount of income a person may receive and still qualify for the special assessment level for residential property receiving the homestead exemption? To me, this sounds like allowing people who make more money to qualify for a homestead exemption that's supposed to be for middle class folks. Is that a good summary of that?
Yes. Scroll back up, Kenny.
Sure.
And this one came from Stephanie Hilferty, right? Is this Stephanie?
Yes.
Stephanie Hilferty is an Orleans Parish rep. She has Lakeview, and then she goes to part of Jefferson Parish. And she's actually done a lot of work with the assessor over the years. So that's kind of where this comes from.
So actually, I have 2 questions before I jump in. It's like, what is the current level of the limit for homestead exemption? And like, what is it being changed to? Like, is it like 100,000 and trying to make it 200,000? Like, what's
the current level is 50,000. It was set, I think, sometime around the 2000s. It's adjusted with inflation. So today it's about 72,000.
Okay. Household or individual?
Household.
Okay.
Household. And she's trying to increase it to 100,000, which would be with inflation. So just some background on this, right? So this relates to what is known as the senior freeze. If any of you are familiar with that, you can lock in your property rate, your property assessment rate in perpetuity until the property is either sold or the owner passes away. If you are 65 and older and meet this income threshold, and there's some other instances like armed services, more than 50% disabled, certified by Department of Veteran Affairs, right? So this is related to the senior freeze. So essentially what this would do, it would cover some more people who are approaching that age bracket or some of these other stipulations to be eligible for that property tax freeze. So gotcha. I'm not gonna tell anyone how to vote for this. I've actually worked with Stephanie on some of these property assessment bills in New Orleans because we've been struggling with this a lot. Our assessments keep going up year after year. Some people being priced out of their homes. So we've talked about these before. Unfortunately, COVID hit and declining revenues are a thing, and it's a big concern, right? So basically what you have to consider for this bill is, do you want to give more people the ability to lock their property tax rate in at a certain level, while doing so, reducing the assessment rolls for the city, which reduces revenue by the city for the city.
Gotcha.
Was there a fiscal note on this on how much it would cost, like, the state or certain parishes?
I'm sure there was a fiscal note on this, yeah. But I mean, I don't know what it is. Yeah, that would have been good to have.
Yeah.
Is there anywhere online that someone could go and look? Because the thing I'm thinking about in my own decision to vote for this is like, how many people we're talking? Like, how many people would this affect? And like, would this all of a sudden make a bunch of people qualify for a homestead exemption? Is it a small number of people? Is it like that would be my question, is like, what is going to be the actual, what's the effect of this? Huh?
Yeah. It's better if there's not a lot, probably. So for anyone watching, I don't know, at the end, maybe you can pull up on your screen the state legislature, the main site. You can look for bills by session, and you can look for or act or HB or author number or whatever. And if you ever want to go back and see, especially if a bill has had a lot of iterations, what the original draft looked like, what it looked like with amendments, be careful when you look at the vote on something, because they'll have the original vote. And then often we're voting on a conference committee report, and the conference committee report might have changed a word in it, or maybe it made it a whole new bill. But for a lot of these, you can go and see the digest and see that if there was a lot of back and forth on amendments, and there'll be an option that it'll say if there's a fiscal note. The fiscal note are for bills that, usually an opponent says this is going to cost us too much. How much is this going to cost? Because sometimes if I'm just changing a civil procedure law, it's just changing a deadline. Or sometimes someone will say, well, that's increasing a fee on something or whatever. This probably has a fiscal note because it will be cost to someone.
Yeah.
And it is important to note that this amendment only deals with properties with a homestead exemption. So, an individual or a married couple would only get one of these properties to lock in that rate, and that's the one that we'd be living in.
We got a question that says, is the tax rate locked in forever, or would it change if the individual had a higher income in later years?
Once you become qualified, you got it in perpetuity. If your income goes above the level, it doesn't matter. Once you get it in, it's frozen.
Just keep in mind you're over 65 or you were disabled or a disabled veteran or something along those lines. And actually that becomes a problem when, like, at least in my neighborhood and other neighborhoods where the grandparent passed away and the family inherited the house, and all of a sudden they owe a
bunch of property taxes. Yeah.
In property taxes because they don't have the exemption anymore. And I mean, that's a different problem. But it definitely happens a lot that families have to sell the property because they can't pay the taxes.
Yeah.
In my district, my district is mostly Gentilly and parts of Mid-City areas around Bayou St. John. This is an issue. And, I would assume that a lot of the people in my district are supportive of this constitutional amendment. But that's why, I'm trying to present it objectively. Basically what you have to look at is, now it goes from 50,000 to 100,000 and is adjusted every year with inflation. So it's going to cover more people, making a little bit more money. But at the same time, the cost of that is reduced revenue for the city.
Yeah. Got it. Okay. And then the last one is there's two more. Sorry. Number 7. Creates Louisiana Unclaimed Property Permanent Trust Fund. Do you support an amendment to create the Louisiana Unclaimed Property Permanent Trust Fund to preserve the money that remains unclaimed by its owner or owners?
So the nutshell reason of why you should vote against this is because this was just a political fish fight that we had to deal with so many times between the governor and the legislature and the treasurer. So there's generally the unclaimed property fund is like 100 million, 150 million at any given time. Something like the unclaimed property fund. Yeah, sorry, our friend just came over. It was about 100, maybe to 150. When you see in the paper online, like, check, you may have unclaimed property. It's just this fund that kind of sits there. It's like always having $100 in your bank account that you just kind of keep there. Well, the treasurer wants that money. He wants to use it. And then the governor said, no, that's our budget money. And we went back and forth and back and forth, and there were lots of fights over it. And I'm remembering now that we looked at it, is the compromise came because they lowered it to 25 million. So there's still going to be 75 to 100 in the main unclaimed property fund. And what this does, and this is a Senator Facey, who I think is relatively new, right? So I don't know much about him. He's like down the bayou, I think. But it would create a trust fund with this money, and then we would earn interest on the trust. I don't see any real need for this. It sounds nice. I personally don't really like it because I think it's just the result of a political battle. But I don't think it's
who would have power over spending the fund if needed? Like,
it would essentially become like a capital outlay
for the treasurer
account for the treasurer.
Okay.
Earning interest.
And the current who controls the current iteration of where this money sits?
Governor/state.
The governor and the legislature.
So basically what this is like, do we want to give the treasurer more domain over this money than the current governor?
Yeah.
Or a future governor? Okay. That's what we're voting for.
It's his own little savings account that he wants. Yeah.
Okay. Got it. All right. And then the last thing, this one's Orleans specific, is asking about fantasy sports. I feel like this one is like very, sorry, I didn't put it all in. This one seems very simple. Like, do you want to allow sports wagering in your parish or not? The question I had related to this and why I left it on here is where do the revenues go? So I know that this came from a bill that was passed in the legislature that allowed each parish to vote on whether they wanted to allow sports wagering in their parish. But like, where does the revenue that's generated by this, if it passes, go? Does it come back to each parish? Does it go to the state government?
It goes to the state, and it's I think dedicated to early childhood education.
Oh, great! Everyone vote for this one.
But it's not as much money as
it's not that much.
Like everyone thinks it's like millions, and it's like I think it's like $500,000, right? It's not. This is the fantasy sports one, or this is like full like regular sports betting, or specifically fantasy sports. No, it's just sports betting. Would expand state gambling laws to allow sports betting in your parish.
Okay.
And it's not just Orleans specific, but each parish votes on it separate.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. And then whatever the revenues are from this would go to what, the early childhood trust fund?
Mm-hmm.
It's not the money people think it would be. It's not the money marijuana would be, but the argument is people can go to Mississippi and other states to do it, so we might as well keep the money in state.
And they put the revenue in early childhood education to better ensure that it,
goes towards something. Right.
Yeah. I mean,
no, just to make sure it'll pass.
Right. But it's my issue, and Kenny, we can talk about this later, but I wouldn't say opposition, but problems with it is, let's just say there's $10 in early childhood funding this year, right? And then we get another $5 from sports betting. What a lot of people are worried about is we're not going to have $15. What they're going to do is move $5 of what was
I see.
The $5.
I see.
And a few people have explained that to me. I was like, that's totally going to happen. But I don't want to say for sure, and that's not a reason to vote against it. It's just something for all of us to be aware of and look out for. But that is why they added it, so that it would pass.
I'm glad you said that, Mandie, because the question that I literally just got was, would they decrease funding from other sources if they allocated this?
I mean,
so good anticipation there.
But probably will.
Gotcha. Okay. Before I have you explain what's going on with voting, because I know we're running out of time because everybody wants to go watch the presidential debate. Let's just review really quick. So number one, basically that is a hard no, because that one would just take away a bunch of rights from women, and that's a terrible idea.
No exception.
Number two is basically, do you trust your assessor or not? Right? That's basically that one. Number three is, can we use the rainy day fund to deal with a federal disaster? You said that you don't see this one being a bad thing. It gives the legislature more leeway in a situation like COVID.
I like it. I like this one.
Okay. Number four, this one's a no. Number four is a artificial cap on state spending, which, and it's no. That's just no. Number 5 is do we want to give more exemptions, more leeway to give exemptions to large corporations who don't want to pay their taxes?
Right.
Or no.
So that one's a no. Number 6 is a complicated one about basically you unfortunately, your grandma passes, she owned a house that is now worth a certain amount. And if you don't have a homestead exemption, you might have to sell the house because you can't afford the property taxes. But also, if you vote for this, your city is likely to have a little bit less in income because more people are going to qualify for this.
I don't like that. No.
You jumped ahead to another problem.
Yeah.
No, the issue is grandma is
Grandma
make more money than $50,000 because of, they're retired. They have pensions. My mom is not in her pensions. The grandma passing away problem is a whole separate problem we need to.
Gotcha. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
So grandma makes $80,000. So
grandma and grandpa together.
Every time her house gets reassessed, if her area is going up, her taxes go up, but she's living on a fixed income. So this constitutional amendment would allow for more people making a little bit more money to get that tax freeze.
Gotcha.
So, but if we vote for it, the city gets a little bit less revenue.
Gotcha.
What you're talking about. I mean,
that's after the fact.
Grandma maybe makes, the 70 or 80,000 and she lives in this $150,000, $200,000 home. And then 20 versions of me move in down the street and suddenly her home is worth $500,000. And that means her taxes have more than doubled. So this would allow her to keep a stable tax
gotcha.
for as long as she's alive.
Gotcha. I'm gonna vote and help out grandma.
Yeah, I think it's generally a good idea.
And then, so number 7 is: do you want to give the treasurer more control over the unclaimed permanent trust fund, or do you want to continue to allow the governor/state government to do that?
Leave it as is.
And then the last one is: are you for or against fantasy sports betting in your parish, and that money potentially being used for early childhood, but potentially being just like a replacement, not an addition?
Yeah.
Got it. All right. Thank y'all so much. I know how I'm going to vote now. I hope that this has been helpful to other folks. Mandie, in the short amount of time we have left before we sign off, can you tell us if we're going to be allowed to vote in November or not? What happened with the election plan?
They're trying to stop everyone in Louisiana and across the country from voting, period. So what's going to happen because of Judge Shelley Dick in the Middle District of Louisiana? Hey, right? You know who that was talking. We have the same emergency election plan as we had in the summer. And so what that means is everyone who had expanded early voting in the summer can have expanded early voting now. And what that amounted to was people who had underlying conditions that made them more susceptible to COVID, or that they were caring for or living with someone with underlying conditions that made them more susceptible to COVID. High blood pressure, diabetes, cancer, there's a whole list of issues. It's on the application. It's not the best outcome, but it's something. It also extends early voting. So usually in Louisiana, we have, I think, 7 days of early voting. It only gives us 10 instead of 20 would have been nice. It gives us 10 and it does slightly expand the hours. I think now you'll be able to vote at like 6 o'clock in the morning. So it does give us basically what we had in the summer. The alternative was terrible. You could only vote by mail if you had COVID, which is weird. Not even if you've been exposed. The election plan that was proposed for November by Secretary Kyle was terrible for a lot of reasons. But this one is the bare minimum. We still need poll workers. You can go online and apply. So many people, including many of my constituents, have applied to be a poll worker. I'm proud of y'all for doing that. I would tell everyone, though, to be careful about voting absentee or by mail, that you can still bring in your ballot. And if you are capable of, like my mom is going to do that, she's going to bring it in herself. You can track your ballot online if you request it online, and it shows when it was sent out and if it was received. It must be received by 4 p.m. the day before Election Day. We are unlike many states that allow you to postmark it by Election Day. That would be the most fair thing to do. We don't have that. So if you can vote in person, please vote in person. If you need to vote absentee or by mail, try to drop off your ballot if you can.
Gotcha. Thank you so much, Mandie. Thank you for your time, especially since I know that you're all up there for a special session. So thanks for taking the time to do this with us. Thank you for all that you do. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. Like Mandie said, please make sure you register to vote and vote. It's incredibly important. I hope that this has been helpful for folks. Tomorrow night, we have another forum, 7:30. We'll be right back here on our Facebook page and on our YouTube. We have Sarah Mojula from the Vera Justice Center is going to be explaining to us what a district attorney does, what their powers are, and what you should expect from them. So join us tomorrow for that. Thanks, everybody.
Please go volunteer. Y'all, there's a ton of candidates. I really like this one. I wore her shirt tonight. There's a ton of really progressive candidates on the ballot. They are going to have a really tough time because of COVID and an inability to raise money. But they really need your time. Phones, canvassing. Steve's great. Meg, Graham, Nandi. I have 12 signs in my yard. Go look at them and pick someone to help volunteer for. But they really need your help. And you know, now's the time to make these changes. DA and the judges. A new DA is not going to get very far with all the same judges. That's my pitch.
Thank you very much, Mandie.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Have a good one.